Welcome back. So last week we talked about just the very basics of chemistry. So we've talked about how biology is a subject in science, but really you can't try to separate it from chemistry or physics or even the earth sciences. They're all intertwined, and a big part of any of the sciences is chemistry. So we talk about chemistry as a foundation to biology. And when we're talking about the different atoms or molecules, um, certain elements are very important, and really we see the big ones are hydrogen, okay, along with the molecule of oxygen and nitrogen, and a big one is carbon. Carbon is what's responsible for all life on Earth. So carbon is a big one, and part of that, all right, you have different things that are going to be made out of these elements right here, and a big one is H2O, which is water. So water has certain characteristics that play a major role in our lives and how our chemical processes or our life functions are going to occur. So water has a high surface tension to it. It also is that is because it possesses cohesion, meaning that the particles tend to stick together and want to stay together. And then it also possesses adhesion, which means that it is going to stick to other things or stay on other things. It's like condensation on a window. It's going to sit against that window because of adhesion. And also, you're going to see that water molecules easily form these hydrogen bonds, and that's what gives water its cohesiveness. Hydrogen bonds also, you're going to see between molecules, going to give water properties critical to life. So if you look at water, we see that obviously the cohesiveness, the adhesiveness, and because of this, trees such as the giant sequoia, giant redwood trees are able to transport water molecules from the soil to the leaves through something called capillary action. And the fact that the water molecules are going to stick together, we see that like we said, that they're sticky, okay, and they are connected through these hydrogen bonds, and it pulls the water up through the stem of these giant trees or any plant, and it's going to, from the root system, get pulled upwards um, to the leaves, and then water is eventually released through transpiration to the environment. So this is part of the water cycle, okay? But also we hear about the carbon cycle. There's a nitrogen cycle. All right, and all of these play major roles in our lives because we are made up of mainly these molecules: water, which is H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, carbon, as well as nitrogen. Water also has a high heat capacity. So if you ever hear someone say, "Oh, a watch pot never boils," that's because water takes a long time for it to boil, for it to change drastically in temperature. Also, when you think about if you go to a lake or to the beach, you know, the lakes or in the ocean, they might be warm towards the beginning of August. They start to warm up a little bit. But if you go in June to a lake, it is still very, very cold water because it takes a very long time. It takes a lot of energy to get it warmer. Water has this tendency to stay the temperature that it is. It takes a lot to, especially large bodies of water, it's going to take a lot to warm it up. So they break down in the textbook that step one, you have heat or energy in the form of heat from the sun disrupts some of the hydrogen bonds between the water molecules, and these new hydrogen bonds are formed almost as quickly as they are disrupted. So while the sun's energy may make sand very hot, when the same energy hits water, um, that energy is going to take a lot more for it to change the temperature of the water. So you might be in the beginning of June, you might be burning your feet on the sand, but it's still very cold in the water, and it takes until end of July, beginning of August, almost to the point where fall is right around the corner, that the water is going to start warming up, but it still is very cold year round. If you go to, obviously if you go to the Caribbean where they don't really have winters like we do, their water is warm, but when you're going to the Jersey Shore or somewhere around here, the water is very cold because it takes so much energy, and water has a high heat capacity. Okay, meaning its capacity for heat, it takes a lot for it to change in temperature, and because of that, we see that water is going to, water up here is going to stay cold really year round. The water in at the Jersey Shore is never going to be 90 degrees because of that high heat capacity of water. Also, water has a lower density when frozen, so this is kind of atypical or not typical of elements or molecules. We see that it's actually the opposite in other molecules. So hydrogen bonding arranges water molecules into these crystalline lattices or crystalline lattice, keeping them slightly further apart and therefore the ice less dense. So typically when you are going to form the solid, it is going to be more dense. So if you have something that is, if you have an element that is liquid and that same element that is solid, the solid is going to sink in that liquid. But with water, it's the opposite. When you take that solid ice and you put it in liquid, which is water, liquid water, it actually, the ice floats. So that is atypical of most states of matter. Liquid water, the water molecules move about freely, allowing them to be closer to one another. So this is, when you look at molecules in their solid state, which would be water that's frozen, versus their liquid state, it's different in the movement of the molecules. Water is also a great solvent. Okay, so when you place something in water, uh, compounds such as table salt or NaCl are broken down into sodium ions and chloride ions. Okay, so it has that ability to break up molecules. Um, so just some things to keep in mind when we talk about water. It has its cohesiveness, its adhesiveness. That is what is going to make surface tension on water. That's what makes certain things be able to, certain insects be able to kind of float on water, because of water's affinity to, or want to stick together. Those molecules are sticky, not sticky in the sense of the way tape is sticky, or something like that, or glue is sticky, but they are sticky as in they tend to kind of stay together, stick together. It also has a reduced density as a solid, which is atypical. We don't usually see that in solids. And the ability to resist temperature changes. Also, it has that high heat capacity. And it's a great solvent, a very good solvent to break things up, it breaks substances up. Living systems are highly sensitive to acidic and basic conditions. This is talking about pH. All right, so when we talk about pH, we have a pH scale. And on the pH scale, you're going to have 0 all the way up to 14. And anything between 0 up to 7 is going to be considered acidic, meaning that it has a greater amount of hydrogen ions. And then anything that is basic is going to have more OH. All right, so more OH ions are going to be are going to make it more basic, and that's why when there's one H for one OH, that makes H2O. When there's a balance in the amount, that means that the pH is 7, and that is why water is a pH of 7. So dissolved materials influence the ratio of hydrogen ions to OH ions or hydroxide ions. And that is really the relative amount of hydrogen ions versus hydroxide ions is what is making something either acidic or basic. So the fact that water has equal amounts of hydrogen ions to hydroxide ions, that is what makes it neutral. All right, whenever there's a balance, if the balance is thrown off and there's more hydrogen ions, it's going to be acidic, and if the balance is thrown off and there's more hydroxide or OH ions, it's going to make it more basic. So we see on a pH scale, water is in the middle. It is considered, it's number 7. It has a pH of 7. It's considered neutral. And then anything this way is going to be a base or basic, or sometimes referred to as alkaline. And then anything this way is going to be below 7. It's going to be considered an acid or acidic. Okay, and that is how we are able to, we're able to measure the amount of hydrogen ions versus hydroxide ions by measuring the pH. So something that is very acidic, like orange juice, has a pH that's under 4, meaning that it has a lot more hydrogen ions than hydroxide ions, and that's what makes it acidic. On the other hand, things like soap or ammonia, baking soda, these have more hydroxide ions, and it's going to make it more alkaline or more basic. So just some things to remember. Acids have lower than 7, bases have higher than 7. Okay, water or neutral substances are in the middle, landing exactly at 7.0. Acids have a higher concentration of hydrogen ions, and bases have a higher concentration of OH ions. Acids can donate hydrogen, okay? And acids also are very reactive, and that's what makes them corrode metals. Something like vinegar, Coke, that's going to help break those down. Where bases are going to taste kind of bitter or have a soapy feel to them, which you'll feel with obviously soap, also ammonia, and neutralize acids by binding the hydrogen and the to the OH. So if you add extra OHs to an acid that has a lot of H's to it, now that is going to make it become more neutral or move more towards the basic side. So things like antacids, if you have a lot of acid in your stomach, you have a lot of heartburn, that's because it's too acidic in there. So we take these antacids, which are bases, and that is going to bring your acidity closer to neutral, move it to the more basic side. So baking soda, bleach, you have Tums, right? Rolaids, milk of magnesia. These things are going to move acids closer to bases, make them more neutral. So in blood, all right, blood has a certain pH to it. It is slightly basic, meaning it's a little bit past 7. It's not at 8 yet, but it's a little bit past 7. So um, we have buffers that are going to absorb the extra hydrogen ions to keep a solution from becoming too acidic, and we can quickly release hydrogen ions to counteract when it's going to be more too basic. So this is how we're able to stabilize our pH. Okay, if something is too basic, we are going to add an acid to it and make it more acidic. If something is too acidic, we are going to start trying to make it more basic, and that's how we create this balance, this homeostasis, or this dynamic equilibrium to stabilize the pH. So just some things to remember: that the pH of a fluid is the measurement of how acidic or basic a solution is, and that's really going to depend on the concentration of dissolved hydrogen ions, which goes hand in hand with the hydroxide or the OH ions. And the lower the pH, the more acidic. The higher the pH, the more basic. All right, acids such as vinegar can donate protons to other chemicals, while bases are going to bind with free protons. So you have those hydrogen ions, which are going to donate, and you have those OH, which are going to bind with free protons. And buffers are the things that we have that are going to change the pH of something. If it's too acidic, we can use certain types of buffers that are going to make it more basic, and if it's too basic, we have certain types of buffers that are going to make it more acidic. Lastly, when we talk about things like pH, we can talk about, well, where do we see this in the human body? Well, the stomach obviously is very acidic. You always hear about stomach acid being very acidic. It's like a 2 on the pH scale. And what we see is that dietary proteins are not digested as well when the stomach's pH is increased. So things like Tums that are going to try to fight heartburn, indigestion, things that are meds that are going to try to treat ulcers. All of these things can lead to issues with digestion because you're having trouble digesting the proteins. So that's where you see that your body's going to constantly be fighting to keep the pH where it should be, because once you make it too acidic, it causes more problems, and once you make it too basic, it causes more problems. So this can put people who take antacid medications at risk for developing certain allergic responses to common foods, as your body is not meant to have your pH being thrown off. So keep these things in mind as we move forward and we start talking about the molecules and the body, or animals, and how they maintain a balance, a homeostasis, or a dynamic equilibrium with everything that they do, whether it's the molecules that are in them, the food they take in, the energy they produce, the pH that they possess. All these things play a major part in our lives.